What are the hottest new phones from MWC 2022?
And what will the next iterations of 5G and Wi Fi look like? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award winning network and Australian based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as usual by Alex Kibben. Hey, Alex, some years you'd be jetting off to Barcelona, but it's a long flight. What are you doing to recreate the genuine travel experience at home?
Well, Adam, it's funny you should mention that because this week, what with rain and work and everything else, I've been sleeping really, really badly. So I'm already really tired. I've started my language studies again. So people are babbling at me in a language I barely understand. If it wasn't for the fact that it's not really sunny outside because the rain is hammering down, you could convince me I was in Barcelona right now.
Are you sleeping in the lazy boy? That's how you know when you're on a plane.
Lazy boy, you're sleeping up the fancy end of the plane, sir.
So, speaking of the fancy end of the plane, we're also joined once again in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by Whistleout editor Alex Choros. Alex, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, other Alex, how do you recreate the joys of international travel from home?
Well, I've managed to get a convention cold despite not going to the trade show, so
That's
apologies if
dedication.
I'm a little bit sniffly or full of a stray cough.
That is dedication to the cause.
This is grand because, according to plans that were made some months ago, I would have been on the same plane as you catching your cold, other Alex.
Yeah, I mean, it's worked out well, but also we could have been on a plane drinking in a plane bar or, having yum on in Barcelona.
Eating your body weight in Spanish ham.
Spanish ham.
So it's Mobile World Congress time again, and as I said, most years you'd find the Alexes chatting in a Barcelona beer garden. Not so much this year. Instead, we're reporting from Australia on what we can see from afar. So, Alex, what's big in Barcelona?
Well, not as much as years gone past, but this isn't exactly surprising. I mean, we saw Samsung a few weeks ago announce its Galaxy phones. In years gone past, those might have been MWC announcements. And then just before MWC, you can kind of argue about whether or not it counts or not. We saw Oppo announce its new flagships, the Find X5 and the Find X5 Pro. Mr. Horosh, what's there to get excited about in the Find X5 series?
I think the most exciting thing in the Find X5 and the Find X5 Pro is Oppo's made a custom neural processing engine for photography. So it's a separate AI chip that's meant to zhuzh up your photography real nice. And given that the Galaxy S2 family felt pretty iterative in terms of camera, it's going to be really interesting to see what Oppo does with this custom photography processor because it's making some pretty big claims, like be able to shoot 4K video at night where every shot is as clear as a still image.
So this is their Mara Silicon, isn't it?
Yeah, for Mara Silicon X.
Yeah. Big claims and cameras are, of course, very much in Oppo's wheelhouse, though. I find it interesting, though, the way that they've gone with the Find X5 Pro and then the regular model, because the X5 Pro, that's a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, same as the as what we're seeing in the S22 series here. But the X5, that's just a Snapdragon triple eight, last year's premium Snapdragon. Do you think that's an issue?
What? I think it's less of an issue than last year. The Snapdragon 888 was a pretty good chip. And in terms of battery efficiency, it seemed to be a step above the 865. And it feels like Oppo did the same thing last year, where with the Find X3, it had the top of the line processor, and then in the Neo, it had the chip from the previous year. But the 865 was just woeful at battery management. So at least the 888 is doesn't feel like getting second best in the same way it might have thought a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, the battery management's interesting, and I don't know if your experiences were the same, but with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, which is what's in the Find X5 Pro, that chip in the Samsung phones so far, I found a bit underwhelming. It's a bit power hungry in my experience. Have you found the same?
So I've only tried the S22 Plus so far,
Mm.
and I found it better than last year's model. I was consistently getting around 5 hours of screen time, but admittedly, that's without 5G.
Mm.
But I found, like, from last year's models, it seems like Samsung has managed to manage 5G battery consumption a little better than they did at launch.
Well, battery consumption generally, unless you've been able to test a 5G model, the review models, and this is very inside sports, the review models they handed journalists in Australia were international and wouldn't do 5G locally.
Thank you, Samsung.
Yeah, not a great look, is it?
It's not brilliant. Well, speaking of looking at things, Oppo also had some really weird smart glasses, which they'd already announced, but they're apparently showing off at MWC. Mr. Horosh, are you excited about Oppo smart glasses?
It's a little hard to be excited right now as I feel just a little bit too limited. The apps only include like weather, calendar, a health tracking app, a translation app, and navigation. So that's not too many use cases so far, and they're definitely like sleeker than Google Glass. But you are still putting a bulky thing on your glasses.
Does it? Sorry, are they actual glasses or is it something that clips onto your existing glasses?
It clips. Like, I could be wrong, but from what I understand, you buy proprietary glasses from Oppo, and then the little mini projector clips onto the frame.
And then projects in bright green, which is very 1980s computing as well.
Hey,
Um,
on brand for Oppo.
yeah, true, true. Also on brand for Oppo, actually, they had some announcements to make about battery charging. Not usually the most exciting topic, but this one could be, well, hot.
So, Oppo's announced two new kinds of fast charging 150-watt SuperVOOC, which is apparently going to be able to take your phone from flat to full in about 15 minutes, assuming a 4,500 milliamp hour battery. And more importantly, Oppo says it's got battery health tech, which means it's going to take 1,600 charges to degrade the battery down to 80%. So, assuming one charge a day, that's almost 4 years, 5 years before you're seeing serious wear on your battery. But then it's got like even faster charging, 240-watt SuperVOOC, which can take your phone from flat to full in 9 minutes.
So
And
basically, you just take a few wires, stick them straight into a wall socket, and jam them onto the phone like you're trying to restart its heart.
oh, it feels like that. But so the 150-watt charging will be on a phone soon, but the 240-watt charging is just a tech demo. So there's no word on whether when that will be available on a phone. But as always, I'm assuming you'll need like an Oppo proprietary charger, which isn't
You pretty much,
always.
you
Does
pretty much always
yeah?
do.
Does it come with free marshmallows? Because that sucker's surely going to get hot.
That was a few Android versions ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's jumping back to Samsung. I think you'll find.
I mean, it's just the laws of physics, right? If you're doing it at that kind of speed, that they must be having to deal with things like heat.
Almost certainly, and Oppo hasn't really talked about the technical implementation, as far as I'm aware. But it seems to have been doing a pretty good job so far. Like a few of its current phones already have 120-watt charging, and I guess we haven't seen any disasters yet.
The one catch I've found, and this might not affect that many people, I love what they do with their SuperVOOC charging, even if it sounds like a Marvel supervillain, because it's just so quick. But their chargers are not always universally compatible. Throw something else onto a VOOC charger, and the rate that you actually get power, you don't, of course, get their full charging. That makes sense. But I've found that sometimes some devices will just go, "Oh, I'm really not sure about this. I'm not," and their own safety stuff kicks in, or they just charge insanely slowly, so that they don't always play well with others.
That's not surprising. I don't think I've had the same experience, mostly because I don't know where my SuperVOOC charger is. But
It's the
again,
really
like,
warm one at the back of the cupboard,
Yeah.
Alex.
oh no.
um, Oppo weren't the only ones announcing phones, though. TCL announced, well, actually, it announced a lot of phones,
About
sort
five?
of. Yeah, but it's five phones, but I'm going to argue that it's sort of really two because they're basically just two sizes, like 6.7-inch or 6.52-inch. These are the TCL 30 and what it's the E and the Plus and the 5G and the SE, and I'm forgetting one, but there's just so many of them. Are these exciting phones, Alex?
Not really. They all kind of feel like kind of like you said, like they're two phones, and they're all varying shades of like mid-range to budget. And we don't even have any confirmation about what's coming to the Australian market. The most expensive one is the TCL 35G, and that kind of comes to around $400 locally, and that seems like a no-brainer for them to bring over because like TCL is I guess, a value-focused brand, and a $400 5G phone is very much in their ballpark. But then the other four devices are all 4G only, and like I don't know about you guys, but it would feel weird for TCL to be bringing four 4G phones to Australia in 2020.
Oh no, I reckon that's absolutely well within their wheelhouse at the price points these are likely to
Yeah,
hit.
at that price point, yeah.
So,
If these things
because
were
we're
four-figure phones, that'd be ridiculous. But at that price point, yeah.
yeah, because we're talking roughly, really, really
Hmm.
roughly, kind of $200 to $400 across the whole range of those phones,
Of
and
course,
they're
but I
really.
feel like they'd pick two or three.
Oh, I don't think we'll see
Yeah,
all of them. No, no, I agree with
yeah.
you there. But they're very much, or they feel like they're very much workhorse phones. They're not terribly exciting, despite TCL's hype. When they were talking up the fact that they've got triple 50 megapixel AI cameras, but this is a little bit of word sophistry. They've only got one 50 megapixel camera. The other two are a macro camera and a focusing camera, and that's a tech mix. Alex, I think you'd agree. We've seen on about 1 billion phones last year in that budget to mid-range space. Everyone had a 2 megapixel macro camera, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, it's just a little bit cookie cutter, but TCL has, I think, got a good reputation for, again, like you said, workhorse phones. They're pretty good for the price, and since TCL launched as a phone brand, they've done that pretty well. And like, if you need a phone, that's a phone at a good price. Like, I'm sure these would be a great option for the market, even if they're not, like don't have the razzle dazzle of the Find X5 Pro.
So, question without notice: you guys have looked at lower end phones more than I have, but I would have said, rule of thumb, you would run screaming from any phone that costs less than $200, and probably you would be reluctant to really buy anything that costs less than about four, because it would really be a cheap and nasty piece of junk. Now, that would have been my rule of thumb maybe couple of years ago. Has that really changed?
Um, so I feel like in the Android space right now, a lot of the phones you mostly want to get at least 6 gigabytes of RAM,
Hmm.
so around $400 price point. I've found when I've been testing phones with less than 6 gigabytes of RAM, I've been like running into more performance hitches than I'd like, where they're feeling just a little bit too slow. I haven't tested too many $200 to $300 phones lately, and I think it's like kind of varying shades of fine. Like they won't wow you, but you do kind of. It's a combative experience sometimes.
I think you get what you pay for, but it has improved. And I think we've got to
Oh,
remember that
definitely.
yeah, that's the smartphone market is incredibly mature now. And if you just need that basic communications device, if you're not gaming, if you don't care so much about high grade video and stuff like that, yeah, there's some very good phones in that $200 to $400 space. You're not wrong, Alex. They are that bit slower, that bit lesser, because you're not paying as much for them. But you're certainly not getting at what I think you're getting at, which is it feels like the back's going to fall off and the screen is so blurry you can barely make anything out. All of those problems are by and large solved. You don't get the latest and greatest, but you get quite a lot for your money.
Mm.
Um, and
Like Motorola, Realme, Oppo, have all
mm,
done really good things in that kind of price range.
even Samsung, their low end A series phones are pretty good for the money. Not spectacular, but absolutely fine if you're sitting there on a smartphone budget. Alex, TCL didn't just have phones though; they also had, I think it was a trio of tablet devices. Is now the time to reignite the Android tablet device space?
So I think the most interesting out of those tablets is the next paper model, which has a matte display that's meant to feel a bit more like paper and should be a bit more natural for drawing on. So that's like the standout for me because at least it's something different than what we're seeing other Android manufacturers do. But I think for me, the problem with Android tablets is that the apps just aren't there.
Hmm.
Like, if you try and open Twitter on an Android tablet, it's just a big version of Twitter rather than being optimized for the space. And that's an unfortunate trend we are seeing, and I'd really love to see manufacturers address it because you run into the same issues with foldables, where like you're running supersized versions of phone apps on screens that are too large for them.
Shouldn't this fall on Google to encourage slash pressure developers to come up with tablet versions? Because I'm sure Apple does that. Apple works with developers to make sure that the best apps work with both iPhones and iPads. Shouldn't Google be doing a bit more?
So Google has developer guidelines on this, and every once in a while it rattles its saber and says, "Hey, you've got to get serious about tablets. You've got to make sure that your apps will work across multiple screen sizes," because that's still sort of a thing with regular Android phones as well. I think the big difference there is Apple did its saber rattling way back when the
Mm,
original iPad came out. They basically said, right, everything that goes through the App Store has to meet all of these guidelines. So basically, everything does. You've still got apps, and I've still got a few that I launched them and I realized, oh wait a minute, this was a phone app, and I've got to hit that ×2 button, and it blows up and
yeah.
doesn't look quite as good. But they're few and far between, and they at least work that way. Android has just been so much more kind of varied, and it's that classic Google thing where Google goes, "Here's our new shiny thing, and it's tablets. Oh wait, there's a new thing over there. Yeah, we'll forget about that for a couple of years. Maybe come back to it." They just haven't been consistent with it.
I agree. It's even been so long since Google did its own tablet. Like for the Nexus 7 was
They
the
were
last
pretty
one.
good in the day for what they were compared for the price. They were like their reference design ones, weren't they? They sort of put that out as an example to the other manufacturers of, look, this is what can be done.
I'm literally staring at one of the really old Pixel tablets that existed and came here as we record this. I have no idea if it has any power or if it'll power up because it's been that long. I just need to
I don't remember the
recycle quickly.
Pixel tablet. Is that before or after the Nexus 7? Because I got a Nexus
That's
7
after
somewhere.
because Nexus is the predecessor
Oh,
to the
okay.
Pixel
Yeah.
brand. So it's definitely after, but it's still old. But Alex, you mentioned foldables, and this is where I got kind of interested with TCL because for years now at MWC they've said foldables. We do displays because TCL does lots of TV and display stuff and technology and R&D. This year they're actually showing off actual Android foldable phones. Did any of them remotely catch your eye?
I feel like my main issue is with TCL that they've been doing this for so long, like you've said, where they've been showing off foldable prototypes since 2019, but still just,
They're the boy who cried foldable.
yeah, where they're like, it's just like, look at what we can do, but they just don't seem like they're intent on actually manufacturing it. It's more just very much feels like kind of like, I guess, look at us too. Like, we know how to do this, but they won't put their money where their mouth is and actually ship anything. And when I've spoken to spokespeople, they're like, we'll do it when we're ready. So, like, like they are doing interesting things, but uh, like there's one where the screen folds out and extends, and that's kind of cool. But
That's the
what?
fold and roll, I believe. So yeah, it both
Yeah,
folds out. Adam, it folds out, and then you actually kind of pull it open, as it were, so it rolls out as well. It's interesting tech.
yeah, like it's a very neat form factor, but like, does it really matter unless they can manufacture these at scale? Because like when you've been showing off prototypes for so long but still don't have anything to market, it just feels a bit disingenuous and almost just like a kind of, oh yeah, but like we'll have cool stuff in the future. We have no timeline.
The timeline is a problem. I think the fact that they're showing these off as Android devices is key, though, because they're
Mm.
actually saying, "Hey, we can make these. We could make these." You're right. It'd be lovely if they said, "By the way, you can buy them next week." But
Yeah, because I
and
guess a few years ago, didn't they? I think CES last year, weren't they showing one where the screen was paper?
they've done some weird and interesting stuff. They've definitely spent a lot of money on this, and maybe it's just a patents game for them. Maybe they've crunched the numbers and worked it out. I'd like to see them in this space, if only because they play in that budget space so much, and that should bring the price of foldables
Oh,
down. Because Adam, I know you've
100%.
Adam, I know you've said in the past you like the idea of foldables, but there's no way you're going to pay foldable level money right
No,
now.
I'm not paying folding money for a foldable. But yeah, so a little bit of competition would go a long way.
Oh yeah, and again, like I'd really love to see TCL bring foldables to the Australian market because that'd be really interesting and like for competition and just for choice. But especially because like right now the space is dominated by Samsung. Like Oppo has really promising tech, but that's only available in China. So it would be great to see someone really make force Samsung to innovate harder in the area.
Does anybody make flip phones anymore? Just standard sort of flip phones? That,
HMD.
Yeah,
but I guess I mean smartphone flip phones.
well, yes, that's the
Yeah.
Samsung,
Okay.
that's Motorola with the Razr. I believe actually Oppo's got a
Yeah.
version of that they sell in China. And Alex, I know you have recently been playing around with the not yet available in Australia other Oppo foldable phone. Their take on the Galaxy Fold.
Yeah, that's correct.
But they're all expensive, high end sort of things.
Yeah, so far the cheapest one's been the Galaxy Z Flip 3. I think that launched at 1,500 locally.
Yeah.
So it's still expensive, but I mean, like the Galaxy Z Fold original launched at 3,000 in Australia. So I guess that's kind of like half the price of like an original model.
The reason why I ask is because I'm starting to appreciate more something that a problem that people have put out for a long time is the problem that women have with large phones and small pockets. Because my daughter is now old enough to have a smartphone, and she's got an older Pixel that I had lying around, and it's not the world's biggest phone, but she struggles to fit it in her pocket, and you can't really get anything much smaller than that. And what she would really benefit from is something like that you could just fold in half, but I don't see that I should have to spend, thousands on a phone like that just for something compact that would fit in her pocket. But watching her struggles with big phones and small pockets, it's like, okay, I get it in such a way that I didn't before when it was only a theoretical problem. So I can really see there would be a market there for a lot of people of, I just want your standard phone.
This
I
is
just want to be able to fold the damn thing in half to fit in my pocket.
this is absolutely where Samsung has actually pitched that particular handset. Although I feel like we're running the risk of suggesting that women's clothing has enough pockets, because that definitely is
No.
a
I was
big,
not
big,
saying
big
that. I
problem
don't
there.
want that hate mail. I do
Yeah.
not want that hate mail.
But
Although
Samsung Australia even did bring out jeans explicitly designed for the Z Flip 3, which
Yeah,
was
but
one of
surely
the
that's the
weirder
wrong.
marketing stunts.
That is the wrong end of the solution.
Yeah, it is. It is. Although one of the other TCL prototypes, the Ultra Flex, sort of solves that problem because it's got a 360-degree hinge. So you know those laptops that you can like completely flip
Yeah.
around so they become a tablet. That as a foldable phone. Again, it's a prototype. It doesn't necessarily exist in terms of being a thing you can buy right now. But if you could make your way over to Barcelona with a bag labeled with swag, you might be able to nick one.
The dream.
It is the dream. Um, Now, speaking actually of Oppo and phones generally, fellow stablemate Realme has a new premium phone, or a pair of new premium phones. Well, they're sort of new. The GT2 and the GT2 Pro. They launched these in China a few months ago, and they feel really, really familiar to me because in a lot of ways they're the Oppo Find X3 juiced up, aren't they, Alex?
Yeah, no, they're Find X3 Pro with a faster processor. They're now powered by the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1.
Hmm.
But otherwise, they feel like very similar. Like they've got the same kind of camera setup with 250 megapixel cameras and a microscope lens. It's missing the zoom lens, but it is just a very similar device. But what is interesting is that they're saying the back texture feels like paper. And I think it's like all like ecologically sourced from, I can't remember quite the material.
It's a strange kind of eco plastic that they say is a lot better and greener than petrochemical plastic, which is sort of nice. I don't know. I can't remember, Alex, what your view on the whole microscope camera thing was. I loved the idea that Oppo was kind of innovating and saying, "Hey, here's something wacky and new," but in the end, I just didn't end up taking or wanting to take that many photos of things that close up. Was I alone in this?
I feel similar. Like I did it like during the initial review period. I did it all the time because I wanted to see what things look like under a microscope.
Mm.
But then I guess like after you've kind of exhausted those initial possibilities, yeah, it becomes less of a curiosity. Like once, yeah, like okay, cool. I've seen an Ethernet cable under 60 times microscope. I don't need to do that again.
It'd be great if you had like the full range on a proper zoom. If you could kind of go right, this is a zoom lens. I can use it for telephoto work, but also it'll focus in close enough that I can use it as a microscope. This is not that though.
No, sadly, it's not. It's just a very specific camera that I think it's like a very interesting innovation, but one that probably leans slightly more towards the gimmick side for all but a few like very specific photographers.
Yeah. Now, Realme haven't said much about local availability because these are premium phones, and that's not really where they play in Australia, is it?
No, I think the most expensive phone Realme sold in Australia was $700.
Hmm.
And like they actually Realme hasn't launched a phone in Australia since the Realme 7 5G last year, if I'm correct, back in May.
It's been a
So
while,
like
yeah.
yeah, like from what I understand, they're being quite selective with the devices they're bringing to Australia. So like it would be surprising if they brought this phone here, given it feels so much like it'd be in Oppo's ballpark.
Hmm. Yeah, well,
But I
they've got to balance all of that stuff. For the same reason we don't officially see OnePlus phones here
hmm,
is Big Daddy BBK is doing management.
but I guess the counterpoint is that we have seen high end Vivo phones here.
That's true. That's true. They have so many brands. On the brand side of things, HMD Global, who have the license to do Nokia phones, have new phones. But again, I sense, Alex, that you're not going to be too excited by these ones either.
Yeah, they're certainly budget phones. Again, like they're part of its C series. That's their most affordable phones. And it's curious that HMD didn't have anything more splashy to show off this time around. I mean, like last time we were in Barcelona, they revealed the Nokia 9 PureView, which was
Hmm.
their first proper flagship. And this time around, I don't know if HMD did an actual event or if they just sent out press
This
releases.
is
But
Here's some
it,
yeah, here's some very cheap Android phones, very basic Android phones too. And
yeah,
these are at the level where, on paper, haven't tested them to be fair, but on paper I'd look at them and go, "Ooh, that's going to be a
Yeah.
bit slow and maybe a little bit under spec."
yeah. Do they run Android Go?
I
Isn't that dead and buried?
No, no, not at all.
No.
And I
Oh, okay.
think they do. I don't have the specs straight in front of me at the moment, but I believe that they do. But again, they haven't said anything locally about these phones, to the best of my knowledge, or
No.
certainly not to me. So, and HMD's done a lot of cheap, low end Nokia phones, which they've never released here. I reckon these might be amongst them, although there were new Nokia laptops announced as well.
I missed this.
So this is not HMD Global, though. This is a French company that's picked up the Nokia license. Because you've got to remember, Nokia, the network building company, the original Nokia, they still exist. They are quite happy to sell their brand to people who want to make tech gadgets with it.
So we could rename the podcast by the sounds of it. We could buy the Nokia name. Sounds like it's up for grabs for pretty much anything.
Well, look, the listeners can let us know if they'd be keen on Nokia hold
Yeah.
behind the tech
Go
news.
fund me.
I get the feeling the Finns would probably want more money than we'd be able to pay, though.
I think you might be onto something there. So new laptops. Anything special there?
Not really, no.
No.
I mean, apart from the fact that they're Nokia
Yeah.
branded, they do seem to be fairly simple Ultrabook style laptops. They're French. They're almost certainly not officially coming here because they'd need some kind of distribution mechanism. And you've got to bear in mind, the Nokia phones that we see here are not distributed by Nokia, who have market presence in Australia because they, for example, supply a lot of networking equipment and I believe the 5G home devices for Optus.
Yes, and I think some of the other telcos might be using them as well for Nokia Fastmile. But the French do love a good branding play. I mean, like it was a French manufacturer responsible for the really chunky Energizer phone we saw a few years ago.
Or the really chunky Energizer phone that was very difficult to see, if I remember correctly. It was promised and had insane battery specs and so on. And this, I think, is one of the things that I'm really missing, not being at MWC, but also looking at the sidelines. There don't seem to be those kinds of really wacky out there concepts even being launched there. This is all fairly regular stuff. I mean, I think the Oppo is probably the MWC flagship phone, and everything else just seems to be, yeah, look, here's your supermarket grade phone. Am I wrong?
No, I think that's a very accurate assessment, and I wonder if that's a byproduct of it being a really weird year where it's kind of like, is it going to be on? Is it going to be
Mm.
off? Because for a brand, I guess you kind of want some certainty around what you're releasing and when. So if the show's up in the air, then you might not want to schedule a big announcement around it. So it'd be really interesting to see what HMD like does later this year, for example.
Speaking of big announcements, we're hearing a lot about the next generations of 5G and Wi-Fi at Mobile World Congress as well, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. So, Qualcomm always does a big show and tell on its upcoming silicon, and you, as a journalist, you sit there and you wade through an awful lot of documentation and some very very dry presentations to
So
get to
many
the nugget.
specs.
Oh yeah, to get to the numbers that matter. And what seems to matter for Qualcomm this year is not so much 5G speed, although 5G can be fast. It's actually 5G network quality with AI because its new X70 modem, for example, has the same download rate as the X65 it's replacing, although it does have faster uploads. And it's saying that an awful lot of that has to do, well, faster theoretical uploads. I guess I should quantify that. Uh, they're saying an awful lot of that has to do with on-chip AI and network management more so than we've made a new one and it's faster.
And that's a common thing with a lot of new technologies when they come along. They talk about speeds first, and then once we get past the speed headlines, then we start to talk about actually quality under the bonnet. And the same, what about, they're talking about Wi Fi 7. Now, I'm just sort of coming to terms with Wi Fi 6E. What's Wi Fi 7? How far away is it? And why would I care?
Wi-Fi 7 hasn't even been finalized as a standard yet. So
So
this
it makes
is
a good
That's very
headline.
Wi-Fi. They pretty
Yeah.
much always
Yeah,
do
It
this.
makes a
Yeah.
good headline then. Okay.
Yeah,
Why not just talk about Wi Fi 8 while we're at it?
exactly. But
Yeah.
it's just like Wi-Fi 6E uses the 6 gigahertz band.
Hmm.
I think like that's got some interesting implications in Australia because, as far as I'm aware, um, modems and routers can't use the 6 gigahertz band in Australia right now. Like ACMA is currently running a consultation process about it.
Hmm.
I guess the thing with it, as you say, it's not yet a standard. On Qualcomm's side, they've got silicon that will support it intelligently. But even they're saying, look, they don't expect to have product in the hands of their consumers. And bear in mind, their consumers are the people who are building the modems. That's not you and me. We're going to buy the plastic box which has their silicon in it at some point. But they're saying they're not expecting to have that to their manufacturing partners till towards the end of the year. So we're not going to see any of that at least until early next year. And that's probably optimistic because, as you say, they've got to pass all kinds of regulatory tests. Standards have to be quantified. But the practical upshot should be, as it's pretty much always been with Wi-Fi, the two things that you can improve, I suppose, are the network quality and the speed, and this should do both.
Yeah, one of the things it's meant to do is like smarter device communication, which does a better job of picking which channels are used more intelligently based on how congested your network is.
And
It
that's
seems
been
like
a
a more advanced version of beamforming.
Yeah, they've also done a thing in the last couple of versions where, as you say, they're much good devices that can handle the faster speeds go in one queue, and other slower devices go in a different queue. So the slower devices don't slow down everything else. They're sort of much better at making multiple lanes of a freeway, so the fast things can get through rather than cramming everything in the one lane and you get stuck in a traffic jam behind the slowest device on your network.
And where this potentially gets interesting, of course, is right now. If you like many people suffer from crappy Wi-Fi at home or in the office, the traditional solutions have been things like Wi-Fi range extenders on the cheap end or mesh networking on the more expensive end. Theoretically, this kind of technology could make those a less compelling option. Obviously, that'll also depend on how much the devices cost.
And I guess which devices actually support it.
Mm.
There's that too. It's not going to do you quite as much good if you're sitting on Wi-Fi 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 products. Speaking of products, actually, that kind of target a slightly older edge, although not super older, MediaTek, who traditionally do a lot of the processors that go into all of those budget phones we were talking about earlier. I think pretty much every sub $200 phone and a lot of the sub $300 phones that have been released over the last little while in Australia have been MediaTek based. They announced a bunch of new processors, but these are flagship processors. Alex, do you think MediaTek's got a chance in the high end?
I guess it'll be interesting to see. Like, it will make sense for I think Oppo, Xiaomi, and OnePlus already committed to using the Dimensity 8000.
Hmm.
So who knows if we'll see those phones in Australia? Like we'll almost certainly see an Oppo powered by the Dimensity 8000. But again, like it feels very much like, at least the phones that come to Australia, like it tends to be Snapdragon. I guess it depends exactly what kind of niche they can carve out, because if they can kind of maybe hit that same kind of semi-premium like we saw with the Pixel 5 a few years ago, where it's not quite a flagship processor, but still flagship in every other sense, that could be a good bet.
Well, you've got to presume that these are phones that are going to have a. We say premium, but they're probably, I don't know, and I don't have MediaTek's pricing sheet, but they're probably going to cap out at around $800 max, and probably a bit cheaper than that.
Mm,
Because in a performance sense, they're akin to last year's Snapdragon, not the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 we've got now.
exactly. Well, I guess like we're talking about the Find X5 earlier, how it's got
Hmm.
last year's processor. Like maybe going forward, like Oppo swaps to a MediaTek for like the light and standard versions of its phones rather than using last year's Snapdragon.
The other challenge that the Dimensity 8000, the 8100, which is more or less the gaming version, and even the Dimensity 9000, which is a chip they announced a couple of months ago, I think, which is their actual top end model, have is MediaTek's not doing millimeter wave 5G at all. They're all just sub 6. And there could, of course, be that problem that the phones that they get dropped in do not have the proper band support here in Australia. They might actually be bad imports and impossible for them to easily release into Australia, which is still a small market in global terms.
I guess like, but look, with millimeter wave support, I guess how big of a deal is that? Again, like how long do we think it's going to take for millimeter wave to be ubiquitous? Like we're still, even like standard 5G is still not
Hit and miss.
great for everyone. Yeah,
Well, I mean, we've talked about this on the show before. Millimeter wave, I don't think will ever be ubiquitous
No.
because of the nature of the technology, the nature of its coverage. But this actually segues into one of the other bits, and this is much more local news out of MWC, which had to do with Telstra claiming a speed record. They, I think it was 5.9 gig down on their live 5G network in Australia, but it was on millimeter wave. You had to have a millimeter wave device. They announced a new one. It's a new Netgear hotspot, quite expensive.
the Nighthawk
Uh,
M6 Pro.
yes, that's the one. Um,
Yeah,
but
$750. It's a lot of
yeah,
money.
Oh, that
yeah,
is a lot of money.
that's business grade expense, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the market they're targeting for it,
yeah.
I guess. But it means, by my counting, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, there are a grand total of 3 devices, 2 hotspots, 1 phone that you can buy that support millimeter wave in this country.
Yeah,
Is that enough?
it's a weird chicken and egg situation where if we don't see millimeter wave devices, what incentive do the telcos have to build out their millimeter wave footprint? And but if there's no footprint, why import millimeter wave models if you're a manufacturer? Like why should Apple sell a millimeter wave iPhone if the telcos seem to be like very sluggish at actually deploying it?
Well, that static sound can only mean that it's time to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Alex Choros for joining us for the show.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And Alex, you haven't been on the show for a while. You might not be familiar, but now is time for you to face the Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. I will ask you all 3. You can answer them in any order you like once I'm done. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question: what's your secret skill or ability, and why does it make you special?
So you can find my work at whistleout.com.au. You can find me on Twitter at a_Horosh, which is CHOROS. The C is silent. And my secret skill is getting through trade shows on a mix of caffeine, cheap Spanish beer, and fancy ham.
I'm going to contest that being a secret skill because I feel like I also use that.
What a coincidence.
It's a shit. I mean, we are Alexes.
There are. Maybe it's genetic. And as always, if you want to catch the Vertical Hold crew, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU via Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or at verticalhold.com.au.
And just a quick reminder for regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband as our sponsor once again this year, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 per month discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan between NBN 50 and NBN 100. The promo code is vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Australian listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And as always, thanks for dropping by. Don't forget to leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice and tell your friends to help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.